In the 1960s, scientists set up a paradise for mice. John B. Calhoun ran the mice experiment called Mouse Utopia, or Universe 25, and this turned into a population drop and a bomb that went off in the mouse society in many ways. Our society today reflects this truth that when we create a paradise, it turns into a prison.
Population control called John B. Calhoun built what was essentially a utopia for mice that was purpose-built to satisfy their every need. Despite going out of his way to ensure the inhabitants of his perfect mouse society never wanted for anything, within 2 years, virtually the entire population was dead.
My name is Casey and I'm the Rumble Right Dad, and this channel exists to tell you the truth about whether psychology is actually viable and usable for modern society, or is it just an ideologically captured gigantic matzo ball in the soup of our culture. I've been a therapist for 13 years, a father for 10, a husband for 10, and I am deeply concerned that we are living in the mouse utopia of today. Let's get into it.
Well, Calhoun noticed that, again, despite ample space, his rodents would often crowd together, which resulted in a breakdown of social structure amongst the population.
Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
No. This experiment, known as Universe 25, was designed by John B. Calhoun. He built a massive enclosure, a mouse city with space enough to hold up to 6,000 rodents, depending on who you ask. He supplied them with everything that they could need: food, water, nesting spaces, and even some activities in later iterations of the experiment. At first, the population exploded, as one would expect. Now we can look into modernity and see how we might be reincarnating this experiment, especially in the baby boom of the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. The mice thrived, doubling every couple of months, but then something shifted after the population reached around 600. Growth slowed, social roles broke down, mothers began to abandon their young, the men started to act femininely, and they stopped defending their territory. Some mice became hyper-violent, attacking without reason. Others withdrew entirely, spending their days grooming, eating, and sleeping. Calhoun called these withdrawn mice the beautiful ones. The perfect coats, no scars, no interest in mating or social bonds, but high stress, according to their urine samples. Eventually, reproduction stopped altogether, and the entire colony died off. A paradise turned into a prison, and then eventually extinction.
Most intriguing of all were a small group of males and females who withdrew themselves from mouse society altogether to live in the upper levels of the enclosure that Calhoun described as the beautiful ones. These mice did nothing but sleep, eat, and groom themselves, and this gave them noticeably smoother looking coats, which, along with their isolation, meaning no scars from attacks, led to their nickname. They seemingly lost interest in all meaningful social bonds and refused to interact or mate. The last birth in Universe 25 took place on day 600, and from that moment on, the population, it slowly dwindled.
What amounted to isolation and just self-grooming. The urine the beautiful ones excreted showed chemicals demonstrating intense stress. The thing is that they largely weren't, in that they weren't under too many actual external pressures. The process of permanently being hormonally stressed was taxing on their bodies, and thus they were unable to really do anything else.
Why did the population collapse? Calhoun had his own theories. He believed that the downfall was caused by what he called the behavioral sink, when overcrowding even resources created social stress that warped behavior. Other theories have emerged since then. Loss of purpose. Of course, when there isn't a natural drive or even an ability to run away from predators, then purpose might be subsiding. There are tests that have tested whether mice ran faster to a goal, as in cheese, or away from a predator, as in a cat, and they significantly run harder when they're running away from something. So maybe that has some loss of purpose derivative. Breakdown of social order. Of course, when your social bonds and your natural order of your families, things begin to go poorly. Even mothers taking the lives of their young. Think about what that looks like in modern society. I should not have to tell you what the parallel is. overstimulation and anonymity. Some researchers compare its effects to modern urban life. Too many bodies in a small space leading to alienation and making you feel like you're isolated within a crowd, which is such an interesting way to think about modernity. You could live in New York City, move 2 blocks away from where you used to live, take on new environments in many ways, and never be recognized again. It's an amazing part of this experiment. Then collapse of the reproductive instinct. Once social bonds broke down, reproduction wasn't just unnecessary, it became undesirable. Some even argue less about the space and more about meaning. The mice could survive biologically, but did not psychologically.
Although the population had survived for many months afterwards, it had effectively died on the 315th day, the day the social bonds broke down, stating, "Their spirit has died the first death. They are no longer capable of executing the more complex behaviors compatible with species survival. The species in such settings die."
Not everyone agreed with Calhoun's findings, and some who tried to reproduce the experiment later did not come up with the same results. But nonetheless, even if we can criticize his methods and possibly even his theories about why this happened, we still need to look into, could humans actually be these simplistic reproductive creatures that when we're not faced with these extreme things to run away from, when we're not faced with conflict, and when our social bonds begin to break down, could we have the same results as Mouse Utopia? Are we currently having the same results as Mouse Utopia because our population is collapsing more quickly in the regions that have more comfort and less strictly to run away from, less conflicts? But in places like Israel, where there is persistent conflict, the birth rate remains high, and under duress, humans have this instinctual response that we want to survive. So we produce more, we defend ourselves with greater vigor. And whether or not Mouse Utopia holds water in those avenues in our modern society, we are reproducing the experiment because those under duress feel the most compelled to have meaning and purpose, and they persist, or at least the birth rate would reflect their persistence at a higher rate.
Social collapse and thus the extinction of the human race. Others have taken a less nihilistic view of his work and believe that his results are comparable to what would happen in a human society, as, after all, we are slightly more complex and self-aware creatures than mice. That said, what's often lost in Calhoun's work is what came after, in which he continued to research and tweak environmental variables to try and find ways to keep the mice from going down the extinction path, even as the population density grew. And, in fact, he had some success at this. For instance, in one case, via simply encouraging creativity in certain mice by various means. Giving them a sort of purpose here, it actually worked, with the creative mice continuing to thrive well beyond what would have otherwise been expected from the previous experiments.
Some have seen this experiment as a mirror for modern life. We are packed in tightly knit cities. Our lives are full of comfort, yet depression, isolation, low birth rates are rising all around the world, especially the comfort and the Western world. Even in Japan, where they have a very modern economy, still birth rates are exceedingly low. Others reject this outright, saying that humans are more complex than mice and will probably persist where the mice failed to. Still, the question remains, if paradise leads to extinction for mice, what does endless comfort do to us? What does the Amazon delivery, the Uber Eats delivery, what does the Uber itself, what does more AI and more in-home robotics, what does bioengineering and biotech, what can all this do to humans but lead us to this comfortable place, and yes, even a paradise or utopia? Will we rerun the Mouse Utopia experiment? Will the Amish take over the world because they're the only ones who still live with compelled action toward a common purpose in a cloistered off community where there is no outside contact? Slowly becoming the beautiful ones might be inevitable for some. And does this mean that we will become the Mouse Utopia experiment Universe 25 rerun? It was more than an experiment, however, it is a parable. And like any parable, its meaning is still debated. Maybe Calhoun was wrong. Maybe his critics were right. Or maybe the truth is that survival requires more than food and shelter. It requires struggle. It requires sacrifice. and it requires meaning. Without those, even paradise becomes a prison, and let's escape the prison of modernity and try to inculcate meaning, purpose, value, and yes, sacrifice and even struggle into modernity. If you would like to join me in that pursuit, I've been a therapist for a long time. I've conducted over 20,000 hours of therapy for others, and I might be able to answer some questions in a future video. If you email me at rumblerightdad@gmail.com, I would love to answer it, of course, anonymously, or, if you want to, let's have a conversation through that, and I would just love to see you. I appreciate your support so much. Let's flex our muscles away from the mass utopia of modernity and post-modernity. I appreciate you watching.